let's go to November 22nd, 63.
Okay, sure.
So the one day that you read about in history books, we will read about forever to come. Every year there's a movie, there's a documentary, there's an article, there's a book, there's something that's going to be written about this. This is going to happen every single year because it was the most admired, loved, let's just say US president in a long time. Him and Reagan were probably in the same category, Republican and Democrat. They were both loved and admired. What happened that morning? Was there anything different about it? How did that whole thing, start off? Was there anything that was a red flag that this day doesn't feel good, et cetera, or was it just a normal day? You're in Dallas, you're driving, how was that day for you?
Well, let me go back to how this all started. In June of 1963, President Kennedy met with Vice President Johnson and Governor Connally down in El Paso, Texas. And they discussed the upcoming presidential election, which was in 1964. They decided that because of how close it was in 60, they really needed to carry the two states in the South that had the most electoral votes to win in 64. That meant Florida and Texas. So they agreed that they would campaign in those two states. So Kennedy went to Florida November 16th, 17th, and 18th, I think it was. Then we took off on November 21st for Texas. Now all this time, the crowds were extremely large. They were very vociferous, enthusiastic, but they were very friendly all the way along. They were really friendly.
Is there any controversy at this time? So everyone there's not really
the only
major
controversy we saw, there were a few signs that said something about civil rights, or a few that said something about Cuba. Other than that, there was nothing. And those people were so far in the minority that, nobody really paid any attention to them.
Sure.
And by the time we got to Fort Worth, which was late at night on the 21st, we got there about 11:05 in the evening. It was raining, and we got to the Hotel Texas. There were 5,000 or 6,000 people right outside the front door. We had to almost fight our way to get into the hotel. It was so, everything was, from a political point of view, it was a smash hit because there was big crowds, and that's what they were looking for, was exposure.
Win South, win Texas, and win Florida.
And they thought if they could get the president out and among the public there in Texas. And so the next morning we wake up in Fort Worth, and first thing we realize is that we were given a brochure that was being handed out here in Dallas. It was a photograph of President Kennedy. In other words, it said, "Wanted for treason." And this was being passed among the populace here in Dallas by some organization. So we knew, that Dallas wasn't going to be all completely friendly. And we had an indication that there might be a problem with some people because about a month before, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, had come to Dallas, and he was making a speech. He was heckled. He was driven off the stage and hit with a placard. The night before we came to Dallas, Chief Curry from the Dallas Police Department got on TV and pleaded with the people of Dallas to be courteous, to show respect, which is very unusual. We did not have any intelligence information other than that incident with Stevenson, other than the fact we knew that the population in Dallas was somewhat split. There were those who really liked Kennedy, but there were those who really disliked him. But that was not unusual for anywhere in the South, because there were persons in the South that were very anti-Kennedy. So we arrive at Love Field. We had the special car that we had flown in to use in San Antonio, and then we moved it from San Antonio to Dallas, and the cars were waiting for us. That car was a Lincoln specially fabricated automobile. It had the capability of a plastic bubble top being used, but we had instructions from the president that the only time that bubble top was to be used was if it were inclement weather like rain or snow, or if Mrs. Kennedy's hair was going to get all messed up because the wind was blowing too hard. Well, neither of those things existed, so no bubble top. So but that's what the trip was all about, exposure. They wanted as many people as possible to be able to see President and Mrs. Kennedy up close and personal. So we started out from Love Field, drive into the city, and the crowds just started to grow and grow and grow and grow. By the time we got to Main Street, the crowd was so large on each side of the street, at times it was difficult to get through the crowds. We had motorcycle officers on each side of the car, and we just, I got up on the back of the car numerous times to be as close to Mrs. Kennedy as I could, because our driver the president was in the right rear seat. Mrs. Kennedy was in the left rear. The driver started to keep the car to the left-hand side of the street to keep the president away from the crowd on the right. Well, that put Mrs. Kennedy right up next to the crowd. So I'd get up on the top of the back of the car and be as close to her as I could so that I could fend off anybody that was trying to do anything. I did that maybe 4 or 5 times going down Main Street. People were hanging out of windows, they were on balconies, they were on fire escapes, and it was a very friendly, enthusiastic crowd. The political people were just elated that everything was going so wonderful. Of course, we get down to Houston, and we had to turn right onto Houston in order to get over on Elm to make a left to get on Stemmons Freeway. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about that particular move. They say, well, why didn't you go straight down Main Street? Well, the reason we couldn't do that was Main Street curved off to the left onto Stemmons Freeway. We needed to go off to the right because we needed to go to the Trade Mart. And so we had to turn right on Houston and then left on Elm, which put us right in front of the Texas School Book Depository. So in that area, the crowds had diminished considerably. The biggest crowds were on Main Street. So the turn from Houston onto Elm is very sharp. And so with these big cars, we had to slow way down. And we weren't on the back of the car. I was on the car immediately behind. It's called the follow-up car. I was on the left side, which was Mrs. Kennedy's side, and I was in a forward position on a running board. And we made the turn onto Elm, and we started down Elm toward the triple underpass. And I'm looking over to my left, and there's this grassy area, and there are a few people, not a lot. Then I was looking straight ahead of us. There was this railroad over the top of the highway. We were going to go underneath it. And there were people up there, but there were also some police up there. We hadn't noticed anything about the building itself, the Texas School Book Depository. We did know that there were, I think, 3 windows open on that side, but we didn't see anything that was unusual. So I was scanning, and then all of a sudden I hear this explosive noise over my right shoulder. I didn't recognize it as a gunshot immediately, because apparently there was some echo in that area. So, but I started to turn toward that noise. My head just started to turn to my right, but I only got as far as the presidential car, because I saw what the president did. The president was sitting in the right rear, and all of a sudden he went like this, and then he grabbed his throat and started to fall to his left. I then realized that it was a gunshot. So I jumped from my position on the follow-up car with the intent of running and getting up on top of the presidential vehicle, the rear of it there, to form a shield there so that nothing additional could happen. I had to jump off the car, and right to my left was a motorcycle officer. And I was running, and I didn't hear anything at that time, but they told me later, while I ran, there was another shot. As I approached the president's car, I was just about grabbing the handle, and I hear another shot. I not only heard that one, I felt it, because the president at that time, he had fallen to his left farther, like this. Mrs. Kennedy's, her right cheek was right up against his left, and he was down like in this position, and the bullet hit him back here, but it came out here. It erupted right here, and a portion of the skull just flipped up, and it was being held by the scalp, and it just flapped forward, and there was a hole in the skull. And I could see in that hole when I got up on top of there. But Mrs. Kennedy came up in the trunk at that time. She was trying to grab some of the material that came out of this wound, because there was blood and brain matter, bone fragments, all kinds of stuff. And so I got a hold of her, and I put her in the back seat. Then he fell farther to his left. The president fell with his head in her lap. and the right side was up, so I could see in this wound. All the brain matter was gone in that area, just completely gone. And his eyes were fixed, and I assumed he was dead. It was fatal.
Right there.
Right there. It was an instantaneous death. So I turned and gave a thumbs down to the other agents so that they'd know what the situation was. And I screamed at the driver to get us to a hospital, and he hit the accelerator, and we started out. Chief Curry was in a car in front of us. He got right in front of us, and he led us to Parkland Hospital. I got myself up. I wedged myself above President and Mrs. Kennedy in the back of the car, and then hung on for dear life as we were going down Stemmons Freeway.
How many years did you relive this moment? Like, at what point? Because I'm sure, one of the things is everyone wants to ask you, so hey, how was it? Tell me these stories. How many years did you constantly relive this moment?
I'm still reliving it occasionally. I got moved from one position to another, and I was being promoted. I was still at the White House detail. And in 1970, I was given a desk job at headquarters. I was the deputy assistant director. That meant I dealt with budget and personnel, logistics, all that stuff. But I was sitting at a desk, and I had all kinds trying to think. That was the wrong thing for me to do, because that one thing I thought about was what had happened in Dallas.
Wow.
And it just ate me up. And I started to really deteriorate physically from the psychological problems I was having. By 75, I couldn't pass the physical. And so they had to retire me. Then I went into a deep depression. 1982, I finally, a doctor came to me and told me I had to quit what I was doing, because when I tried self-medicate, I was self-medicating myself with alcohol.
Wow.
After I got out of the Secret Service. And I cut myself off from everybody. And I'd never discussed what had happened with any of the agents or with my family. In 1990, I finally came back here. That I should have done in 1964.
So wait a minute, from 63 to 90, you've never come back to Dallas. And you're in Dallas today, but from 63 to 90?
I never came back to Dealey Plaza. That's what I needed to do. I needed to come back and be there, go up in the Texas School Book Depository, look out that window, really recognize the angles, the weather, everything I could. And I did that day.
How emotional was that day?
Oh, it was tough to do.
Did somebody accompany you, or
No,
did you come by yourself?
I did it myself.
Oh, you came by yourself. What did you have to do yourself? Did you have to, in your own mind, as a Secret Service, you're calculating everything? Was it, there's nothing I could do about this that we could have prevented?
But see, the problem was, we all had that sense that we failed. Our job was to protect them. We failed to do it that day. And so that's what was killing me. Because I'd been brought up that when you're given a responsibility, you carry it out to the end, you do your job. And it just ate me up that we had been unable to do our job that day. And I really had a difficult time with that. And that's why I came back to Dealey Plaza. I wanted to see myself if there was anything I could have done that I didn't do. I finally realized I'd done everything I could. Based on everything that happened, the way it happened. It wasn't until I was convinced to write this book that it really started to help me. That's the most cathartic thing I did, was to help Lisa McCubbin in writing these books and to talk about them. Once I did that, it just got better with time.
Therapeutic when you were talking about it.
Very.
Unbelievable.
And so I've talked to groups suffering from PTSD, and that's what I was going through. And that's what I tell them, is that you've got to be willing to talk about it. If you don't, it's going to eat you up. You just have to get it out, find somebody who's a friend or a counselor or a minister, a rabbi, a priest, whoever.
Regardless. Just
doesn't matter.
about it.
Talk about it.
Yeah. So the way I think about it when I watch it, first of all, what you did, right there, that moment, a person learns about your instinct. Your instinct is to protect. There is no test that you're going to do as a Secret Service agent to know how you're going to react when somebody's shot on the job. That's when the world found out who you really were, when you jumped. Your instant reaction was boom, just on top. That I think the reason why the world has such an affinity, whenever you read anything about you, obviously you can't please everybody, whenever you read anything about you, the affinity the world has for you, for what you did that day, is probably one of the main reasons why there's so much respect for you, for what you did.